You're listening to the Forest School podcast with Lewis Ames and Gemma Southerden.
Hello listeners. Hello, how are you? We've got a cracking podcast for you today, all about neurodiversity and Forest School, where we've talked to two practitioners all about it. So strap in, it's a big one and really important. I just wanted to come onto this intro and apologise first of all for my dog barking in quite a few places during this recording. Asa the lurcher wanted to make his presence felt, so sorry about that. I also wanted to say a huge big up thank you to some of our Patreons who support the podcast with a monthly donation. And those people are Ellie Kelly, Joe H, Jude Vinton and Christy McAvoy. Thank you so much, guys. If you guys at home want to support the podcast because you're enjoying it and it's helpful for you guys, then Patreon is a great way to do that. And it really, really helps us to put the hours in with all the reading that we do and the editing. I mean, I'm sure you can't tell that we do the editing ourselves because it just sounds so slick and so professional, but we do. But the Patreon place to go is patreon.com/Children of the Forest, and you can find all the information there and you can choose how much you want to give. So if you're enjoying it and it's helpful, then that would be amazing. You could also write us a review of the podcast. That's also great. That really helps us out. So you could write a review on any of the platforms where you find your podcasts. So Jude Vinton actually wrote a review directly to us, and she said that she listened to the podcast on the vagus nerve that we did, and she said it made my inner geek dance around in circles. You sharing your practice helps me see and know the path I want to journey on as a practitioner, so thank you. It's so lovely to get feedback like that, so thank you very much, Jude. Okay, without further ado, here we go. Listeners, we're here with Emily Edwards and Bex Allen. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. It's quite late in the evening and everyone looks like very cosy on their little Zoom cameras. It's all like low lighting and nighttime chats. And this podcast came about because Lewis was reading a book and I was reading a book, and then we were kind of discussing those books on social media, and we're on the Discord server called Autism and Forest School, and there was loads of interesting chat happening on that server, and we'd spoken to a lot of people, and lots of these kind of threads about neurodivergence and Forest School and autistic women and neurodivergent practitioners kept like popping up, and yeah, various kind of conversations happened on social media, and I was like, there's a thing in this. Someone else mentioned, isn't it interesting how there seem to be a lot of neurodivergent folk involved in Forest School, and you know, is there something really interesting to be discussed here? And so I kind of put the feelers out about wanting to be involved in the podcast, and Bex and Emily very kindly agreed to join us this evening. So yeah, we're just gonna have a little chat about that. And the first question, I guess if you guys could tell us a little bit about yourselves and the work that you do and where you're based, that would be great. Like, Emily, do you want to start off?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick off. So I'm a Forest School practitioner. I am in Shropshire now. I was previously in Oxfordshire until April, so just moved over into Shropshire. And I have been working with an organisation that support young people who, for whatever reason, are really struggling in mainstream. So I guess it's really like an alternative provision for neurodivergent children who have experienced trauma and various other complicated, difficult, challenging stuff in their lives. And this organisation support them through like a mentoring programme. And part of that, and the bit that I was working in, was Forest School setting. So very lucky to have the most amazing site over near Much Wenlock. Acres and acres and acres of woodland, beautiful Nissen hut that's been done up. So we had a little sheltered space as well as an outdoor kitchen and lots of free space to roam. So that's the work that I have been doing most recently.
That sounds amazing. How long have you been there?
So I started with them not long after we moved here. So since April, so a couple of months. It's really fascinating work, and what I particularly have enjoyed about it is that it's one-to-one. So it's been my first experience of actually using Forest School as a one-to-one thing rather than group settings, which is often what Forest School, the picture of Forest School that you conjure up is often with groups. There have been times where there's been another Forest School lead there, and they've been one-to-one, and we've kind of like buddied up together when that's been appropriate to do it. But yeah, more often than not, one-to-one. And some summer camps as well, actually, over the summer. So it's very diverse, very complicated sometimes, but worthwhile and fascinating stuff. I love it.
Brilliant. Thank you. Bex, how about you? Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yep. I help run a charity called Spectrum Gaming, which predominantly is an online community for autistic young people. We also run meetups, but these are mostly in Manchester at the moment, which includes a Forest School. The plan is that I'll be running the Spectrum Gaming Forest School for the Southwest, as I'm based just outside Bath. But I need to finish my coursework and Forest School training before I do that, which obviously I'm doing with you. I've also helped Michael James. Helped him. I've talked at his workshops about autism and Forest School, which has just been brilliant. That's been great. I guess I've worked in Forest School really for a number of years. I mean, I was a trained tree surgeon and stuff, but I kind of thought, what am I doing hanging around in trees? I should be on the ground working with young people. I kind of went into Forest School after that, but I've never got my qualification up until now with you, hopefully.
Just before we go on to the next question, I wanted to call back to something, Emily, that you said about working one-to-one in Forest School, because I was having this conversation with somebody else the other day about how the level 3 training requires you to do your 6 sessions with a group of learners, with a minimum of 8 learners, but the accrediting body that we use anyhow. And I was reflecting on that the other day and thinking how that's quite sort of fixed, and how it shouldn't be really, because so many people are working one-to-one or with smaller groups with a wider variety of needs, for example, that, why is there this fixation that it has to be eight learners? That's something that I think should be amended and be a bit more flexible depending on the groups you're working with. So I'd like to kind of investigate that a bit more.
I think just to add a little bit of something there that's come up for me actually working one-to-one, and I don't want to go too much off on a tangent, but I think having some flexibility in terms of how that's assessed is quite important, as well as in terms of training as well, because something that I have to think carefully about when I'm working one-to-one is like lone working policy stuff and health and safety, how to check in, how to check out, how do we communicate that between myself and the person that I'm working with and for. So I think you're right. I think that would be an interesting thing to kind of explore a little bit, because, if you're trained just to do groups and to think about groups, of course, we're all capable of maybe thinking outside the box, and we're, as Forest School leaders, are very good at doing that and kind of getting stuck in and being adaptable in that way. But I think there's a very serious conversation to be had around needs, meeting needs and being safe there, especially when you are working with people that might have some complex stuff going on in their lives.
Absolutely. And that could be part of the course, couldn't it? Like, to give extra preparation for that, because I'm sure lots of people who do their level 3 training then go on to find that they're working in that position, and hopefully they're supported by the organisations they're working with. But it would be great for it to be part of the course. So that was covered. Cool. So we put out the shout out to kind of invite neurodivergent practitioners to take part and kind of in this podcast, and we just asked for you guys to tell us whatever you would like to about your own neurodivergence. Emily, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So my journey, I guess, has started through my daughter. So Izzy is 8, and she has given me permission to talk about her here. I explained to her what I was doing this evening, and she said that she was happy for me to mention her. So Izzy was diagnosed in Easter time, I think, earlier this year, was autistic and ADHD. And through the process of questioning her development, I suppose, over the years, learning more, reading more about autism and things like that, just started to kind of have these light bulb moments of, oh, I can really relate to that. So it's through her, really, that I've been given this gift of self-reflection and awareness and stuff. And as I've learned about her, I've learned about me. So that's kind of how it all unraveled for me. And I think that's quite common from other people that I've spoken to, that when their child or children get diagnosed as autistic or other neurodivergence, that they discover that they're identifying with some of that themselves. I don't know whether you can relate to that, Bex. I don't know whether that's how it happened for you too.
Yeah, definitely. My son was diagnosed autistic. I think, well, I knew he was autistic like loads before he was diagnosed, and then realised that I was definitely autistic too. I think throughout my life I've just been sort of diagnosed as depressed and of having depression and social anxiety, and you just seem to get misdiagnosed a lot. I think women especially, and we're going to talk about that. It's been quite a journey. A good one. Yes.
Yeah, so it's just, for me, it's just, lots and lots of personal insights happening, especially at the moment, which can be amazing, but also really challenging and difficult to unpack as well. And quite uncomfortable, very vulnerable. And I haven't been assessed yet, but like Bex, kind of self-identify as autistic, possibly some ADHD traits as well there that I recognise as well, and definitely want to be assessed. That's something that I need for me. I think I need some validation and some concreteness. I quite like that kind of knowing. I like to know.
It is that's an interesting subject in itself, isn't it? The fact that we actually need a diagnosis to feel validated, as it's like, you don't get diagnosed gay, you're gay, it's like, I know I'm autistic, but we still seek a diagnosis from a neurotypical male. Imposter syndrome, that's what I'm on about.
Yes.
So when you get that,
So as someone that I've not been, so my only experience with the diagnosis process is when I was teaching. I had some children who were going through the process. I've been very much on the edge of it in my forest school capacity of going, okay, this person's starting to look at that, or this. So I guess one thing I would want to know is how subjective is the diagnosis process? Because Bex, that you've just mentioned, is normally someone who's neurotypical, statistically speaking, they're normally male.
Emily wanted to point out here that they did have a woman, and in fact a neurodivergent woman, amongst the professionals involved in their assessment process. They did pay privately for that because the waiting list was so long. But Emily said it felt wonderful to know that an insider had been present on the journey, and the professionals that were engaged for the assessment used the term autistic spectrum condition and not disorder without them requesting it, and that was a really positive experience.
Is it that you would go, that's one person's opinion, and you go and see a few people, or is it like once someone says no, you're not allowed to go anywhere else? Or
you're definitely allowed to go again.
You have to read your it.
Yeah, if you don't agree with them, you go back.
Right.
Yes.
And so what does that?
I mean, if you think about children especially, how often they might go and not get a diagnosis, then a few years later they go back, and then,
I remember being a teacher, and the would it have been an ed psych coming in?
Yeah.
To have a look, and I won't say who, someone in senior leadership, basically going, all the good stuff that you do day to day, don't do any of it today. Don't, because this ed psych needs to see a certain thing, and you are already gap filling or meeting needs, maybe without realizing. So pull all of that back today.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's a very.
What we say about diagnosis is you only tend to get diagnosed when you're at crisis point.
which is not when you need a diagnosis. You need a diagnosis way before that you get to crisis point. And typically with boys, it's because they are causing challenging behavior to other people, and that's why they get the help. And it's not for the children, it's for the blooming adults that are going, we can't cope. And it's really frustrating. And that again is why lots of girls don't get diagnosed and don't get the help they need, because they're not externalizing their behaviors, they're internalizing it, and it's really frustrating.
Yeah.
She's gone.
Who? Me? I'm here.
Gemma.
I'm so sorry. I put myself on mute because the dog was barking and then I was talking. That's the saying of this current age, isn't it? You're on mute. Sorry, I was going to ask about your guys' experience sort of post-diagnosis and the support that is available.
You want to go? Shall I go?
You go. I'm still thinking.
I would say virtually none. When Milo was diagnosed, we just got a certificate diagnosed. Woo! That was it. And eventually, there were a few courses at the local specialist school. But to be quite honest, they were all pretty bad.
For you to go on.
I went on them as a parent, yes.
Yeah.
The only one I really liked was the sensory processing talk they gave us, because we got to wear a sensory blanket, and I was like, yes. I'll just keep this. But all the information was pretty dire. Yeah.
In what sense was it outdated or just not appropriate, or
just outdated? I think what I know now, and I would obviously challenge virtually everything they came up with, and said.
So where have you found that your best sources of information, or is it just through lived experience that you would challenge what they're saying, or is it that you're reading stuff or talking to other people that you're finding out what you think is actually right?
Mostly from other autistic adults. Lived experience, other autistic adults. Blogs, books, some books. I mean, obviously Michael James's book is one.
Yes, Forest School and Autism. Yes.
Yeah. Give him a little shout out. And I didn't say before, but obviously I've been running courses with Michael for Forest School practitioners about autism and Forest School, which has been great. And actually I've learned loads doing that, So I've been there to share my own experiences, but I've also learned a lot from the other people that Michael has brought along and what he's sort of told everyone.
Yeah.
I want to hear about your books. What you felt about your books.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can talk about that for sure. Lewis, do you want to go first and talk a little bit about just
shall I? So I think what I would like to do is talk about the experience of reading and researching my book rather than the particular book that I'm reading. And I think that will become obvious by the time I get to this vague monologue. You can't see it, people listening, but Emily and Bex are both nodding and smiling and going like, yeah, too right. Don't talk about that. So I read, I should have the book in front of me. I'd have been real professional if I had the book. It's women and girls and women with because they refer to it as autism something disorder, don't they? They have the word disorder. Spectrum. That I couldn't remember what the S was. Sorry. So
by Sarah Hendricks. I've just found it
with an X and then an S, which is
it's a K and an X.
A K and an X. That's I'm very vague on details. I'll fluff.
It's only because I've got it in front of me that I can tell you that. It's important to say when it's written, I think.
Yes. Well, there's two parts to that. So I am predominantly an Audible person, and the book came out on Audible this year. So the information that came through for me was like, this new book's just come up, and it's come out this year, and it fits with, if you look at my Audible things, it's all about child development and brain development and all these things. So it got recommended to me, and I went, oh wow, a book's come out this year. great. Started listening to it, got a few chapters in, went, this is so massive, I need to have the actual book. Then started going through the actual book and I'm putting things in. And then, sort of preemptively was like, I, believe it or not, am a white, cisgendered, neurotypical man. And it would have been wholly inappropriate for me to be like, from any book, to be like, hey, I've read one book. Let me do a podcast about it. Tell everyone how great I am. So reached out and went, I'm reading this book. What do people think? And all this stuff. And got lots of different bits of feedback, and particularly got some feedback that said, well, actually, the Audible book came out this year, but the book is what are we now? So 6 or 7 years old. And a few people kind of going, this book has moved on. I mean, it should have been a red flag to begin with, that it had the word disorder in it. I think I skimmed past that because as I started reading the first few chapters, the author Sarah was talking about her own neurodivergence, and so I felt comfortable going like, oh, this is written by an autistic person. This is an autistic account of the world. But as with anything, you can't just take one data point. It's a very academic book. It's quite pathologizing. So it's very like, this study proved this, and this study said 60% of this. And, if you looked in the actual book, it's full of footnotes. So it's very much down that end rather than the anecdotal thing. But it was an interesting experience going through, because on the one hand I was going, well, I shouldn't be put off this book just because it's old or because it's got one thing wrong, because you could discount lots of research and lots of reading by going, that person has spelt one thing wrong and therefore that's that Facebook mentality, isn't it? You spelt this wrong, so everything you've said is invalid. But equally trying to weigh up, well, I'm hearing from lots of people that this book doesn't represent them or doesn't represent their experience. And so I have basically stopped reading that book, and I got about halfway through, and because it's that anecdotal thing of feedback from people weighs bigger than stuff that's academic and written down and doing whatever. So I kind of went, oh, all the people I know and like have told me that's not the best book to read, and that's where I am. I have stopped reading it. I don't know if that's the right decision. I don't know if that's the wrong decision, but that is the story of what's happened with me in this book.
Do you guys know the book?
No,
I don't know the book. No.
Just realised, sorry, I'm a bit concerned that I'm going to be beeping a lot. If I beep a lot, tell me and I'll mute, because I've still got Discord on and I'm going to get,
No problem. No problem. Lewis, can you tell us a little bit about the feedback that you got about why the book was not the best source? So I know that using the term autistic spectrum disorder is outdated and is not a preferred term by many autistic people. And you've mentioned that, but what other feedback did you get about why the book wasn't great? Can you remember any off the top of your head?
I think largely it came from this idea that the book refers sort of throughout the first half. I can only talk about the first half. That's the confusing bit. So the first half, it refers very strongly to, I'm using air quotes here, female autism. And the way it talks about it is almost as if it's a completely separate, there's almost no overlap. The more I read, the more it was starting to get slightly nuanced, but certainly the first half of it was very much about this is what female autism is, and it is different to male autism, and it is this, and it is this. Which, if you just read that thing, you could then walk around proud, going I know about this thing, and I know that female autism is different. I think and so that was the feedback I was getting, was people going, actually, that's not quite right, or that doesn't represent my experience, or it's a lot more nuanced, in the same way of using the word disorder isn't a preferred term, going female autism isn't a good way to describe what's going on here. I think in the book's defense, I think the first bit is almost like, when someone's championing a topic and so they become so bang the drum, raise the banner, this thing's going undiagnosed, blah, blah. So that might have been why the first bit of the book was so like, it's this own thing and it's unique, or it's completely separate or whatever it was. But I don't know that that's a good viewpoint to approach. It's not very nuanced to kind of be like, oh, if you have a penis, your autism looks like this. If you do not have a penis, your autism will look like this, which is, you know, ridiculous on the face of it, isn't it?
Especially with autistic people. Where, you know, where a majority, well, not a majority, but a massive amount of non-binary or trans or, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So that's my experience, is kind of going, I think it just shows how important it is to not, for this sort of subject, as with many subjects, not to just be an academic, dry, here are the resources. If then, you know, and even that one you could go, oh, because, you know, the phrase that goes around is nothing about us without us. But you could almost argue that, oh, that book's written by an autistic person, so it's not about them without them. But you can't just take one, you know, I can only then go, this is probably about that person's autism.
Yeah.
So.
But it's interesting because I heard you say that, you know, you went to a place where you felt fairly safe, I think, to kind of float your experience with other practitioners and other neurodivergent people to ask for some thoughts. And it's interesting that you valued their feedback enough not to then continue for now. You know, you might change your mind, you might reflect on that, you might, you know, whatever. But I think what I'm trying to say here is that, you know, having a place to go where you can talk to a neurodivergent community in a way that's open and inclusive and about hearing others' opinions and sharing, I think that's a really important thing to do. And it's one of the reasons that I'm glad that Discord group's there, because, you know, it does take a bit of courage sometimes to ask if you're a bit worried about it or, you know, whatever. But I think the fact that it's there, it gives you, in this instance, a space to challenge some of your own experience of, oh, I'm reading this, but it doesn't quite sit right. Or,
I think for me, that Discord group is actually very useful. You know, I was so when, because I was also at these meetings that Bex and Emily were talking about autism in Forest School, and then it was kind of like, well, let's set up a Discord thing. Nobody really had capacity, and I was like, well, I'll set it up, in that I just started it, but I'm an incredibly lazy admin person, so I do basically fuck all. But then I was talking to Michael James about it, and he was going, well, that's actually really good because it shouldn't be led by me. So I learned the most from that Discord group by saying absolutely nothing, but just reading and just being like, you know, not that I'm not supposed to say anything, but I can gain a lot from just reading those conversations and going like, oh, okay, I've learned from that. And it's sometimes, like you say, it's about bringing those conversations or those thoughts into a bit more of a public space, maybe, so that, you know, you need that safe space to sort of start them. And at a certain point, I think some of them need to be shared so that the wider community and more practitioners can hear them.
I just think on that note, there might be people listening who are going, oh, what is this? I want to join it. And what is Discord even? Is it something that it can be joined by anybody? If they have Discord, can they like search for the group and find it and join, or do they need to be invited?
You, Lewis.
I'm not entirely sure how it works, to be honest. I set it up, I know there is a link, but I don't know how anyone else has ever joined it. I sent it to like the people in the email chain, and then now there's loads of people in it.
So, I was invited to join it. I know that, but I'm sure that somehow we can get a link out or something if there are people that are curious and would like to be part of it.
I'm a Discord king, you know. Yes, you can just put links out and and send invites, and it's really easy.
Brilliant.
You can put a link in there.
We can put a link in the show notes for this, can't we? So that would be great.
Yeah, and there's like a general conversation thread, and there's a resources thread, and it's all very helpful.
It is. And I'm trying to make a point, but I don't quite know how to get there. But I think what I was trying to say is, I heard you say about the nothing about us without us. And I think that's what you did with your experience. You saying, something doesn't sit right here. And you actually brought it to the community in which that experience lives. And I think that's key. And I think more of that needs to happen, not just about the female autism or, you know, that particular thing, but about all of this neurodiversity stuff. It helps me to know that there are others to connect to in the Forest School community about this, and I'm sure we'll get there soon, because one of the things that you gave me the heads up about with this conversation was about, you know, what does your neurodivergence bring to your practice? And I think that's one of the things that I got really excited about when those conversations first started happening, and there was then the leap into the Discord group to kind of contain some of those conversations, was about, you know, the fact that the Forest School community does have a lot of neurodivergent people. There's a lot of diversity within that group of practitioners. And something that I got quite excited about was, how can we collaborate? How can we bring that experience together? How can we change our practice? How can we better educate? Or, you know, how can we better do training and those sorts of things? Pooling all that together to make a real difference in terms of what we're doing, why and how.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to that kind of topic then, because
that's really does my head though, because you haven't talked about your book, and so that's the
oh, sorry.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Keep with the books. Let's finish that.
Okay, do that, and then we'll move on to the next question. Yeah. Thank you for bringing me back on track. So my book, which I've nearly finished, and again I've listened to it on Audible, and it's very short. It's called Divergent Mind by Janara Nuremberg, and its subtitle is Thriving in a World That Wasn't Designed for You. And it's a study of neurodivergent women, those with ADHD, autism, synesthesia, high sensitivity, and sensory processing disorder, exploring why these traits are overlooked in women and how society benefits from allowing their unique strengths to flourish. And it's really, I like it in terms of it bringing lots of questions to mind about lots of things, including myself and people that I know, and just the world in general. It's quite a good kind of overview in terms of what different neurodivergence might look like and feel like through the voices of the women themselves. So she's interviewing lots of different people in different fields of work, and kind of finding out about their own experience and their lives. And what I like about the book is that it's also kind of looking at what we can learn from the community and talking about how the world can be made better through listening to those voices. So there's whole sections on workplaces and how to make those new workplaces more friendly for all of these groups of people across the range of neurodivergence that exists, by talking to those people and finding out like how we can change environment, how we can change kind of processes and things like that, which was really good. And there was a really interesting section on sort of adult occupational therapy, which I'd never heard about before. And she is American, so it was based in America, but she talks about how she was a gymnast when she was a child, and she got her diagnosis of autism and ADHD quite late, well, not late in life, but, you know, as a parent, in the same very similar ways to the ways you guys were describing. And then she goes to see an occupational therapist as an adult, and who is able to give her all these different sensory experiences and read her body language, read her facial expressions, and feed back to her what works for her and what didn't work for her. And then she's making all kind of links back to her childhood and going, oh, there's the whole thing about gymnastics that she was interested in as a child, and talking and lots of things about listening to her own heartbeat and things like that. And what's the sense where you're...
Interoception.
Yes, interoception, which I learnt about 2 years ago now. And when I learnt about that, I just blew my mind. I was like, well, of course, of course.
Can you explain what interoception is for...
Yeah, so, well, I'll say, if I get this wrong, please somebody correct me, but it's the awareness of what's happening inside your body. So that might include awareness of hunger, of temperature, of your own heartbeat, of needing the toilet, Am I right? Have I missed anything there, you guys, in terms of?
You're on point, and I think to add on to that, it is a sensory system. So it is, it's part of your sensory system, and it's also the place which allows you to know what you're feeling. So whether that's a body sensation or an emotional feeling, I think it's important to mention that, because it's a huge part of how we regulate emotion. And regulation is a huge topic in terms of neurodiversity, I think, and needs.
But we're recording again. We were talking about interoception before our internet went weird, and how it's incredible, because we've been talking about like the 5 senses since whenever, and then you learn about vestibular sense and proprioception, but interoception is just like, well, that's like everything, isn't it? It's like how have we managed to like get this far without having really meaningful conversations about it, and how we design education and workplaces, as I was saying, without an awareness of that. Absolutely. And that's what this book does touch on, is and it's in many ways it is a personal account of her experiences, and she kind of says, I want to share with you some things that have helped me, and I can't necessarily say they're going to help for you, but these are some things that have helped other women that I've spoken to, and she makes it clear that she's talking about everybody who calls themselves a woman in this book. In the very beginning, she's very inclusive about what can be, and actually she's talking to women and their experience of it, but so much of what she's talking about could apply everywhere and to everybody. And I think it's one of those books that you could read just to raise awareness, and anybody would probably benefit from it. So I liked it. Lewis is back. He disappeared for a bit.
I'm so sorry. My computer is so my computer is set to automatically go to bedtime at 9:30, because I'm never up past 9:30. So my computer just flashed up and went, don't worry, I'm going to sleep. And I hit every button on my keyboard to go, no, don't go to bed. So that tells you a little bit about my life. I'm never up past 9:30.
Woo! Party time. This is rock and roll time now. Then this is like, oh my god.
Sorry, you sorted it out while I was gone, though, right? You explained everything.
You've got a few bits to delete. That's all.
You know exactly what autism is. We can just write a list. It's done. Yeah, we've sorted it.
Yeah, we go to sleep now.
That's great.
Right, is everyone happy if I go on to the next question now, that we were beginning to touch on before I talked very briefly about my book? Is everyone happy now?
Can I maybe make one suggestion of another book?
Emily.
Of
course. Oh, yes, please do.
So I haven't read all of it yet, but I am reading Spectrum Women, Walking to the Beat of Autism. And I think the author is Australian.
Yeah.
Written by Barb Cook and Dr. Michelle Garnett. And a bit like you said about your book, very inclusive, got various different chapters in it, all neurodivergent voices. And just to give you an idea, so like chapters on growing up on the spectrum, identity, diversity, gender, intersectionality and feminism, personal relationships, socializing, anxiety, addictions, personal safety, etc., etc. Wow. And so far, I'm really, really enjoying it. So that is something that some people might want to
aimed at women again.
Well, I don't know. I think it's just
sorry.
So again, it's called Spectrum Women. So it's I don't know whether I would say it's aimed at women. That's not certainly how I've received it when I've been reading it, but it's I don't know.
I bet not many men would pick it up, though, would they? On Spectrum Women, unless there were nude pictures in it.
That's what's missing.
Lewis would read it. Lewis would read it without any nudie pictures.
That's true.
Read half of it. Let's say I'd read half of it, and then
it's a very thick book, mind. Maybe.
Yeah.
Emily, that sounds a lot more like in depth than the one that I have just read, which is very short and is more like, these are the things that exist in the world and you should know about them, whereas that sounds really like focused and detailed.
Yeah.
Can I just quickly apologise to all the men I've just offended? Sorry, didn't mean it.
I think it does raise a point though, Bex, about I think there seems to be, and maybe this is just my own awareness rather than like an actual thing, that like books and literature about autism, I'm not sure, maybe 10 years ago, I wouldn't have expected to find anything anecdotal or personal. I would have expected it all to be aimed at, you are either teaching in a specialist setting, or here is a pamphlet, you've got one autistic kid coming in your class next year, read these 5 pages and you'll have it. But there is something about having, like Gemma's book being shorter and more kind of like, okay, if you've only got a couple of hours, this is what's for a couple of hours. If, it's the same as everything, isn't it? If actually personal stories speak to you more, here's some books that have personal stories in. Do you think that I was going to say market, but I don't mean market because I don't mean it to be commercial. Do you think that like wealth of resources is growing, or is that just a perception that I might have from where I sit?
Wouldn't know because I've never looked into it.
Yeah.
Solid answer.
I don't know either, but I think what I'm noticing is more neurodivergent voices speaking out. That's definitely something that I'm noticing, and I think I would consider those to be resources, because those bits that are shared on Discord or elsewhere, or bits and bobs that you find as you're scouring YouTube or whatever, I think there's so much more out there from autistic people.
I wonder how much of that is our bubbles that we're living in as well.
It's hard to know, isn't it?
Yeah,
that is true.
Once you go in there, you're in there, and then you're in that group of people. Whereas before you weren't, and you can still, God, there are some awful autism groups out there still.
I think the thing that really winds me up about having like women with autism titles on books, I just find it's like a marketing gimmick, really, isn't it? I think what we need are books about presentation, autism presentation. So it should be about internalizing or externalizing, and how that presents itself. Not all women internalize, and so not all women show like that, and same with men and boys. You have lots of boys that go undiagnosed because they're internalizing it, and it doesn't come out till they get home, and all those sort of stories that you hear quite a lot about. It just frustrates me. It's just money, making money, and there could be better, and then it gives false beliefs about autism, that women present differently to men, which isn't true.
So kind of a question. So Bex, if there are awful groups in there, is that a thing that you feel like you need to stay in and like be part of, even though it's not ideal? Is that something that you would I just have to step away from this?
I step away from it because it upsets me. I have a friend that likes to stay in these groups to know what's going on. He says that he likes to, and then cause a bit of trouble now and again. Just throw out other ideas and things, groups that really love ABA and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, will we, I know it's quite late already, have we got time for you to briefly talk about ABA, or we will be here? I'm only joking because I know how much some people won't know what ABA is. Is it possible to get a short version of it?
I guess it's dog training, really, isn't it? Dog training for children. What's the actual terminology? What is it? What does ABA stand for?
Applied behavioural analysis, I think.
Yes. It's very big in America. How would you actually see? You didn't tell me. I'd have to talk about it. So
would it be fair to say it's that conditioning thing of getting neurodivergent people and saying we just have to show them there are consequences. We have to punish bad behaviour, reward good behaviour. Exactly. They will, in air quotes, they'll learn.
And it's all about making them appear more neurotypical.
Right.
So their nice behaviours that they see are eye contact, replying when they're meant to reply, all these things they get. It's teaching people how to mask, which is extremely traumatizing, and doesn't need to happen.
Have you seen? I want to speak about this so briefly, because if I'm allowed to, I'm going to go mental. But if for anyone who wants an example of seeing ABA in action, there is a program on the BBC at the moment called Please Don't Exclude Me. Have any of you guys seen it or heard?
No.
I have heard about it.
Oh
No, don't have
my goodness! Like, it is basically, a amazing behavioural specialist troubleshooting woman is like parachuted into these like troubled schools with troubled students who are just behaving terribly, and she that's a sarcastic voice, by the way, listeners, so some of the examples of things that she does, she's like, look, basically she doesn't say look, it's easy, but that's the vibe of the program. It's like, this is all you need to do. So there's one little boy called Oscar, and I think he's in year 2, and she tells him, when I say Oscar, you either look at me or you say yes straight away. And that's her thing. She's like, Oscar, yes. Yes. Oh, well done. Good boy. You did it straight away. She goes to see his parent, his mum. He's in the middle of doing something, and suddenly she interrupts his flow. Oscar, yes. He goes, yeah, good boy. It's like, out of nowhere, it is just like, it is like watching someone training a puppy, and he's just this poor child, and the mum is like going, oh my god, if only I've been doing this since the beginning. Oh, it's just like, no. Anyway, so that's an example of that kind of. And
in England, it's called PBS. It's a light-hearted version, positive behaviour support, which most schools still do.
Right. Can I make a link between what we've just been discussing in interoception, just briefly, because we've touched on it? I think it might pull it together a little bit. So there's an amazing occupational therapist in America called Kelly Mailer. I don't know whether you've heard of her. A lot of people probably have. I think she's amazing, and she teaches and advocates for an interoceptive informed approach to people who've experienced trauma, neurodivergent people, and all sorts. She's got really amazing content. But I noticed that she posted this earlier, and if it's okay, I'd like to read it out. So she says, I have a client right now that has been subjected to years of compliance-based approach. He has been routinely taught to ignore what his body is telling him he needs to do to feel safe and regulated. Stop pacing, sit still, look at me. That fidget is too distracting, don't hum. Ugh, she says, it breaks my heart. We are working to undo years of this damage and empower him to listen to his body signals and use them as clues to what he needs to regulate, connect, and thrive. He was referred to me for interoception-based support, and it makes me wonder, where would he be if he had been encouraged to listen to his interoceptive signals all along? And I love that, because it's about that person listening to themselves and really trusting that they do know themselves. And yes, okay, they might need some support to be able to connect the dots, but it's certainly not an externalized, rewards-based, putting a square peg in a round hole approach, which is very damaging and very traumatizing, as you said, Bex.
Yeah. And what about the approach of actually educating the other, so giving the example of a classroom, educating the other people in there, adults and children, that actually that behaviour is fine? Like, is it hurting anyone for somebody to be fidgeting, for someone to be pacing, if they need to get up out of their seat without asking? All of those things, the behaviours you're describing, is actually that's not abnormal, that's not naughty, that's just what they need to do right now. And really, if we had that kind of inclusive environment and awareness that stimming, for example, is not something that should be called out and people should be teased for that, like actually informing the community, because I think we can trust children. So, I mean, if you can trust some children to, once they've got that knowledge and that information, that once they're, once they get it, that could be that, that there could be a lot of benefit to happen there. And that's never really talked about, is it? It's all about that person and changing that person's behavior as opposed to changing the perception of it.
Here, I would totally advocate for that. And I'm sure if you've heard Michael James talk, and in his training and with Andy, actually, they discussed how at Forest School often we are creating inclusive environments because there are opportunities to meet needs in different ways. So let's just take sensory needs as an example. You've got maybe 5 or 6 hammocks strung up, and all children in that group, regardless of what their needs are hopefully making use of the opportunity to swing, to push each other, to fall out of it, etc., etc. So it's not just, Bob's going to carry the heavy books around the classroom because he needs that proprioception, and we're doing it in a very discreet way. It's here's everybody together in the woods, the hammocks are out, the ropes are out, everybody's got opportunities here, and it's so much more inclusive. And Bob probably can regulate in a much more natural way alongside his peers and his teachers and whoever else, without it being an intervention that's used just for him. It's about everybody. Yeah.
And for the, leaders, and then just
Yes.
to talk on to our, one of the, I think the next question we were talking about with leaders, and that thing that not every adult is comfortable inside four walls in a informal attire, and actually we're missing out potentially on lots of amazing leaders because not just the children are getting put in boxes, but we're being told that educational leaders need to look or behave or, I was talking to someone the other day and it was saying that but workers in the NHS and teachers and sort of educational, teachers broadly, let's say, are one of only two occupations where we are told that our bodily functions have to be put on hold. Our needs are, if you work in an office, you can step away from your desk when you need to. If you work in, almost any other job, you can kind of within reason, within a certain boundary, you can go, okay, I go to the loo here, or I do this, or I need to sit on this type of chair. But teachers and healthcare workers are kind of told like, no, this is when you can use your bladder, or this is when you can sit down. And we miss out on loads of great people because of those restrictions. So, Bex, I wonder, what's led you to Forest School, and, what sort of benefits have you brought?
For me, I have had many jobs, in my life. And it was interesting. I'll just talk quickly about when I was helping my son at school, for example, because there were no one-to-ones that could, cope with him. So I went in and helped. And God, I could not cope in that school environment. It was like, well, it's not surprising that he can't cope. It's just awful. Yeah, I don't know what to say.
So why Forest School for you? What does Forest School allow you as a job, as a career? What does it facilitate for you personally?
I mean, obviously, for me, being outside in nature, I really struggle in buildings, in cities, in busy environments. People smell of perfume. I just struggle in general. I've got quite a lot of sensory differences. So for me, I've lived off grid since I was like 18 years old because I just couldn't handle houses, all of it. And so, and obviously Forest School, swings, we can go on the swings, we can go on the hammocks, we can do it all as well, with the kids. So we are regulating ourselves just as much as the kids are. I just love being outside in nature because it is very calming. And I want to give up now.
Yeah. Emily, how about you?
It really resonates what Bex has just said. So I love being outside. I've always loved being outside. I remember when I was a little girl, I used to spend a lot of time outside at my grandparents' farm with my granddad, doing gardening and things like that, and playing and pretending they were aliens and using like pegs and stuff to make things with. So for me, I've always loved being outside in nature and found it very calming, as Beck said. I think what I love about Forest School is that it enables me, like Beck said, to kind of meet my needs at the same as supporting other people to do that for themselves as well. So being quite dynamic, movement's really important to me as well. So having the opportunity to move, I feel calmer outside. I love being able to hear the wind blowing in the trees and the birds singing and things. That just brings me it grounds me. It really grounds me. And I don't like being confined in four walls. I do really struggle with that. and I really struggle with sitting for long periods of time. And like Beck said, I've done all sorts of different jobs. That's kind of the story of my life, is that I've jumped around. So I've got like a toolkit of skills rather than a career. But the variety suits me. I really like the variety. No 2 days are the same. You started by saying that you're really tired, that yesterday was a bit of a tricky day in the forest and it's different today. And although sometimes that can be difficult because of that transition and things being different, actually it kind of keeps you on your toes. It kind of keeps me feeling quite stimulated and like with it. So that's what forest school enables for me, really, is more regulation, I think, and more variety. It's more dynamic and it's quite flexible as well. And it gives, certainly my practice is, trying to open up that communication space and owning my stuff and modelling that interoception-based stuff to the people that I'm supporting and working with outdoors. So, yeah, it's awesome.
I think as well that the system, the way it works. So in lots of environments, it's very, you stop this, do it now, and then you do that, and you do that. And with forest school, it flows, and that again suits us all much more. I find it very difficult to stop doing something and then suddenly have to do something else. So yeah, that's really good. And so for the kids, they're actually being able to do their play cycles and the end. And
definitely. And I love the playfulness as well, and being silly and getting a bit goofy and embracing that side of me as well. I think that's really important. That I guess it enables me to embrace a lot of the different facets of who I am in one, rather than having to be office Emily or support worker Emily or whatever else. It's kind of embracing all those different threads and weaving it in the moment in that job, rather than just one thing and wearing a mask and trying to hide everything else.
That is such a really interesting point, isn't it? Because that really made me think about, when you're learning to be a forest school practitioner, you're reading about forest school and the principles of, all that stuff, and it being holistic. And you've just put that in a nutshell in terms of as a practitioner. And we always think about the practitioner being part of the learning community. Just, our experience and our input is as valuable as the learners. But that really summed up that holistic nature, and especially when you're thinking about it in terms of job categories. Yes, I absolutely, for me personally, that is exactly what it is. Yeah. And not having to wear a different costume, both physically and metaphorically. Yeah.
Until the parents come along, so it's much nicer when it's just the kids.
It definitely changes things.
Yeah, because you don't have to be the responsible adult.
You don't have to be. I've not tried it, but I'm sure it would.
You've got Gemma, so it's all right.
This might be a good point to read. We got some, I was going to call it feedback, but that's not right. Somebody called Zoe that couldn't be with us in this meeting has sent us an email with her thoughts. So I wonder if I can read that, because it kind of this makes sense at this point. So I decided to apply for a job at my local forest school initially because I understood how myself and my son, also autistic/PDA, enjoy and find the natural world soothing and calming. The environment has such an important role to play, especially when we think about our responses to our sensory world, which sometimes differ to neurotypical individuals. Personally, I love the space, no walls to feel trapped in, and so many things to fiddle with. The setting can ask for candidates to have an experience of working with children with SEN. So I felt the organisation were looking to improve their understanding and the support they could offer the youngsters who were attending their setting. Although I'm not forest school trained, I'm a qualified teacher with personal and professional experience in the area of neurodiversity. Personally, I found my colleagues far more open to human diversity, and the ethos adopted within forest school fits brilliantly for individuals who may feel greater anxiety or a sense that they don't always fit in. The atmosphere is one of great acceptance and supportiveness for everyone. Whatever they feel comfortable sharing with us, we can meet them there. I have loved the low pressure process. That's hard to say. The low pressure process, not outcome-based approach I was used to in school. And by allowing those who constantly needed to assess their surroundings and analyze their comfort zone, which is hugely exhausting. Just by offering time and freedom, supported and guided when needed, has shown me that there is a place where all brain types could experience peace and release together. Comments from parents confirm this weekly. Children who struggle and feel unhappy daily in mainstream school come to Forest School and probably for the first time ever feel a complete sense of relaxation that allows them to feel free of the anxiety that pushes down on them in the neurotypical world. And when I say neurotypical world, I don't mean the people as individuals. I refer to the way the world narrative about being autistic. Having a disability or having special educational needs at all carry negative connotations which imprint on children very early on and sadly can develop into a sense of feeling lesser than others around them. This is something I have felt personally and I still feel it now as an adult. So I hope to give the youngsters I work with the understanding and help that I didn't have so that they can grow up and feel they have a voice and confidence to be proud of who they are and to be able to communicate what they need so they don't feel ignored and undervalued. I hope I also offer valuable advice and support to families because I know it can be very hard to see your child struggling and constantly misunderstood. It can sometimes feel very lonely. So talk things through with people who are living a similar experience can be such a relief. There's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. And a lot of it very valuable.
Yeah. And she's moving on to talk about our next question, which was about what you think your neurodivergence brings to your work as a practitioner. So we kind of talked about it the other way around, like what does Forest School give you? And we've, both of you guys have touched on it already a little bit, but is there anything else you want to add about what your neurodivergence as a practitioner brings to your work? So Bex, you were talking about like gender and relating to young people and things like that. Do you want to tell us a bit about your thoughts there?
So I also think, the way that autistic people don't necessarily see authoritative figures in a good light or at all. We don't sort of recognise that because people have to, just because somebody says something and they're an adult doesn't mean that we're going to accept what they say or, and I think that because as an autistic person working with children, I kind of see them on a level and I see them as humans rather than children. And I think that probably really helps the relationships. Obviously there are lovely neurotypical people out there too that also see, children on a level, but I think, it's just something that has come to mind. That was, one of the things.
Yeah. You so you were talking about relating to young people for sure. And then you said about thoughts about gender. Do you remember what that was? If not, don't worry.
So as a practitioner, I don't know. So I've been talking to since you said your thing, I've been talking to lots of autistic women. And it's quite bizarre, I think. I don't, it sounds weird. I don't think of myself as a woman. And it seems that most of the autistic women I know don't think of themselves as like women. We're just people. I don't know. And I think, lots of us come out as tomboys and all the rest of it because we don't stick to the typical view of a woman or the typical view of a man. And is that what you want to talk about? Yeah.
And I think, being around somebody with that concept of gender or that lack of, gender conformity is going to be so beneficial to young people, isn't it? So, they're getting these messages from the world all the time about what it means to be this. And we've talked a little bit about gender in Forest School previously, and it's such a fascinating topic in terms of like the Forest School environment being, there is probably no environment that is without gendered messages. But if you just take the woods and being in the woods, then it's a lot less gendered an environment than a lot of other places are going to be. So I think that's a really valid point, that if you have practitioners around you when you are a young person who have, a much more open-minded view of what it means to be woman, man, human.
So seeing women chop wood, seeing women do all the good things that we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Emily, you've spoken a little bit about what you feel like your neurodivergence brings to your work, but is there anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, there's loads of stuff. I wrote a list actually because I got a bit excited about this.
Fantastic.
So for me, like as a forest school practitioner, I'm not working or employed by a school. So the first thing is that being self-employed for me in terms of my neurodivergence is really important, because that means that I'm in control and I've got some autonomy in terms of my practice and how I do things and what my ethos and values are. And that gives me some expression of my individuality within that, which is really important to me. But that does come with its challenges as well in terms of my neurodivergence, because I do struggle with quite a lot of stuff. So just for example, like paperwork and finance, admin and accounting and things like that is really, really tough for me. So I need to ask for support to help me with those things. And also in terms of, being self-employed and making agreements and contracts with people that I'm working with or partnering with to deliver stuff, I really, really struggle to put boundaries in place for myself, because I'm a very giving person. I always want to give more of myself than what I'm being paid for example, or I'll always be happy to give the extra. And I really do struggle to be firm around taking care of me. So that's something that's a constant learning curve for me. And I'm fortunate to have good friends that I'm able to lean on and that can help me and nudge me in those areas. But that is something that requires a lot of energy. And I also find it really hard to step back from things a bit as well, because although being able to focus and concentrate on stuff that I absolutely love for very long periods of time is amazing, and it means that I can get stuff done, like policies and procedures is something that I wrote down on this list. I love doing policies and procedures. I love doing risk assessments. They're quite procedural, systematic. I'm very detail orientated, so things jump out to me very, very quickly, and I'm able to assimilate that in a meaningful way, hopefully, that creates some really good forest school documentation. But sometimes having that real hyper focus and that ability to stay in there for a long time, it's hard to stop. I like to complete things, so it is a bit hard to stop and rein myself back. But in terms of my actual practice and being out in the woods, the things that I wrote down were observation skills, and especially noticing subtle changes in people and quite nuanced things and patterns. So I can often tell, for example, that somebody's becoming dysregulated even before they've noticed it, especially if they do, for example, struggle with interoception, and they lack a bit of interoception awareness. So I can often get in there with some strategies and things that I know that work to diffuse something that isn't even a thing yet. And I know, I feel that in me. It's a really hard thing to notice, and it's only something that I've been able to really think through and to really kind of try and hone in on a little bit. But I think it does feel that I feel that it's not just seeing and noticing with my vision. I can feel something. Very sensitive to things like that, noticing people's routines, and then just being naturally able to kind of continue with that, being really empathetic, being able to be really with that person where they are and being with them in their world the best that I can. That's something that I find really
you don't
easy.
feel any of that because you're autistic, so you don't have empathy.
Oh my god. Oh my god, that's a whole other thing, isn't it?
It is. That's a big misconception, isn't it, around not having empathy.
You read this?
Yeah.
Gemma is holding up choice theory.
Yes.
You guys read choice theory?
Yes.
No.
John Cree talks a lot about choice theory, I think, in some of his trainings.
He does,
and also, who wrote the double empathy?
So Bex pointed out that the double empathy problem was written about by Dr. Damien Milton, and you can find loads more information on the internet if you Google it, especially on autism.org.uk. And in a nutshell, the double empathy problem suggests that when people with different experiences of the world interact with each other, they can struggle to empathise with each other. So the whole point is that it's not the kind of outdated view that autistic people struggle with empathy. It's that actually when different people with different neurotypes interact, they both may struggle with empathy with each other. So it's double-sided. lots of people like choice theory. The reason I was holding it up was because William Glasser does make some comments about autistic children in the book not having any need for love and belonging, which I really struggled with. So I got about that far in the book and didn't get much further, I have to admit. So that's the reason I was sort of holding it up there.
Stuff.
Is that Luke Beardon? Are we on about? He does the autism plus environment equals outcome, isn't it? That's Luke Beardon.
Oh yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely have bucket loads of empathy, and hopefully anybody that knows me really well would hold me to that. And actually, it's a funny thing, because the next thing on the list is very easy for me to park my stuff, which is a bit of a flip side of empathy. You'd think that if you're feeling the feels and you're really able to be with someone and to have that compassion, that it's hard to do the opposite and to really put your stuff in a box. But I do find it really easy to do that. So imagine that somebody is becoming dysregulated and they're maybe going towards a meltdown or a shutdown, or things are really just really stressful and overwhelming for them. I think as practitioners anyway, we're always really aware of our stuff. And so, you don't bring your personal things into the forest and stuff. But I do find it very easy in that moment, in that split second, like put it in a box, put it to one side, compartmentalize that, and I'm now focused on this thing. I do find it quite easy to do that. Not so easy to do that for myself, but when it's for somebody else in that setting, I do find that quite easy to do. And just that creativity and like noticing patterns and being able to link things together and just general creativity in terms of crafting and being busy with my hands. I love that. I love being able to share that with people. I've wrote loads more. Do you want me to keep going, or Bex, do you want to chip in?
Can I ask a question? I apologize. So we were talking earlier about having a space that you can ask questions and you can do. I'm slightly hesitant about asking this question, so I'm not sure I'm going to word it in the best way possible. I'm going to go for it. So Emma, you're self-employed.
Yeah.
So, and Bex, are you just working with Spectrum Gaming? Do you?
So
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I understand, I can imagine, let's say, that it makes sense to me that Spectrum Gaming, the whole point of it is run by autistic people, autistic experiences. Yeah. It makes sense that the leaders are autistic. I was wondering, in like I was going to say secular, that's not the word. Like in a self-employed setting, is your neurodivergence something that you would advertise? Do parents go, oh, that's great, that makes your setting better? Is it something you don't mention at all and you go, if they ask me then I'll tell them, but if they don't ask, I'm floating around a question that's not really there?
No, it's really makes sense. So with me, with Spectrum Gaming, it's definitely a plus. So even verifying children to join Spectrum Gaming, the parents are just like, oh my God, this is the first time I've met an autistic adult, and they absolutely love it. And yeah, it's great. That's definitely a plus for us.
And same for me as well. I've had the same experience. So when I've explained that I'm the parent of an autistic child, or if I've shared some of my own stuff and my own experience or my own difficulties, in relation to what might have been going on in a session and how that's allowed me to relate and stuff like that, then yeah, it's definitely seen as a positive. I guess the negative in some ways for me is that it's really early days for me to be talking about my neurodivergence in this way. So it's amazing to have this opportunity to share it, but it is quite vulnerable and new still. And I think it is difficult to bring that conversation when you're self-employed and you're making partnerships or making an agreement to work with somebody. When you're employed, or maybe you're a volunteer and there are particular procedures or things that are done around that. I don't know. I think that's almost expected, or there's a space for it naturally there. Whereas when you're self-employed, it's different, I think. And one of the reasons that I really want to be assessed and to have a diagnosis, if there is one to be made, that I think it matters to me that people know that I have some lived experience, like you just said, Bex, another adult saying to you, I've never met an autistic adult before. And that connection, I think, is really, really special and important.
Yeah, it's interesting with me with the whole diagnosis thing, because I am on the waiting list, and some days it bothers me more than others not having a diagnosis. But it's interesting. So when I am with other autistic people, it's really easy, and we just get each other, and it's there's nothing hard work about it. But when I'm with neurotypical people, it is hard work, and I come away feeling absolutely knackered.
On that note, we had this whole other question about there's a lot of discussion and books written about autistic neurodivergent women, which we've kind of talked about, haven't we? And the last question was kind of, what is your sort of personal opinion and experience on the matter? But I am very aware that it is really late, and we've kind of been that's been like a thread all the way through this conversation, hasn't it? But I just wanted to invite you, if you would like to have anything extra to add on that you think hasn't been said, that you'd like to say about being a neurodivergent woman, and what your personal experience and opinion is on the kind of discussion that's happening now, and books that are coming out. If you feel like you've said it all, or you're just like, it is the end of the night now and I need to go to bed, that's completely fine. There's been so much incredible conversation. Go on, Bex. You felt like that when we started. Well, it didn't show. Yeah. Great.
There's nothing like a really heavy topic to get your brain ready for bed, is there?
I know. Everyone's going to sleep so well tonight. Not. I'm going to be there at 1 a.m. going, oh my God, and that thing.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to play over this. I will play over this, go to bed and go, oh my God, and then think of all the amazing things I could have talked about and should have talked about and should have mentioned. But that actually is something good to think about as a practitioner. So when we've done a session, then going home and thinking about the session, and that is sort of rerunning it,
beating yourself up, really just getting into it, and
you what?
Just beating yourself up, really getting into what you did.
But also thinking out on the positive things, but I'm thinking, how you can change, what you could have done differently. And I think any issues you would play through your brain until you've kind of fixed them.
So some of my reflections about this big question was around how this the girls, women autism thing is a really imperfect concept, but I wonder whether at some point that was a good place to start in terms of raising awareness and improving understanding about what might show up differently for a woman versus a man, person, whatever. But I think as we started off, that does not include people who identify as non-binary, as trans, and gender really ought to be a very minor consideration, because at the end of the day, we're all humans and we all have needs. So that was kind of some of my musing and reflection on it. But then I went to the book that I mentioned earlier and had a quick look in the gender chapter when I was really panicking and feeling very nervous about coming, do I know enough to talk about this? And I found a really cool quote and I'd like to share it. So she's saying there was a talk presented at Cambridge University, UK in 2017 by the University Disabled Students Campaign entitled Autistic People, Not Gendered Minds. And that was in reference to Professor Baron Cohen's extreme male brain theory of autism. To quote one of the speakers, it says, gender variation is natural. Neurotype is natural. Start by seeing us as people, not as weirdly gendered minds, and we'll go from there. I really liked that.
Yeah,
I really like that. And the bottom line for me personally is that we're humans, and the gendering of autism is perhaps really not that helpful.
Not at all. I mean, every autistic person is an individual, just like every neurotypical person is an individual. We all have different things going on.
Yeah.
And did we actually talk about nature versus nurture? Did we talk about that, about gender? So, the whole thing with this sort of comes about that, so males present in a way that's more external quite often. So boys, because they've been brought up to be, oh, boys, which is just nurture, not nature. And girls internalize everything. So they're much more quiet and they don't, scream and shout until maybe they become teenagers. And then it all comes out, And I think that's an issue, especially with diagnosis. And which makes everyone see it as different genders, but it's not. It's just the way they're brought up.
Yeah,
nature.
And there's a huge, you could go on forever, couldn't you? Kind of like unpicking these layers, but there's something there around society as well and social constructs and all that stuff as well. And maybe there should be a part 2.
Oh yeah, I mean part 22 definitely.
Yeah, maybe let's just keep going.
Oh, guys, thank you so much for your time. I feel like this has been a really valuable podcast, and I'm sure that everyone listening will really agree, and especially at the end of the day at this late hour. So huge gratitude to you for taking part.
Thank you.
And to Zoe, who sent us her email as well. Thank you to you. And yeah, I want to keep the lines of communication open. So if anyone in response to this podcast has got anything they would like to share, then drop us a line, and we'll try and put as many links as possible in the notes for the show. Bex, Spectrum Gaming is your organisation if you want to find out more. And Emily, is there anywhere that you want to flag up now in terms of like following great work of the organisation you're working for?
Well, I'm between work actually at the minute. So the organisation that I have been working for, I'm transitioning into other work now.
Okay.
So I'm floating a little bit in the ether, and I don't have a website or anything. But maybe if people did want to contact me specifically, they could do through you, and you could let me know or something like that. That would be great.
Yeah, brilliant.
Amazing.
If you like this podcast and want to support more episodes, you can donate through Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Children of the Forest to show your support for the Forest School podcast.